Okay, I want to give you a brief introduction to Federalist, which was written by James Madison. Madison, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, published a series of essays in defense of the Constitution, which had been put forward in 1789. Now, Madison was actually the main author of the Constitution. He drafted it up before the Constitutional Convention. It became known as the Virginia Plan. Madison was from Virginia, and it was the basis of the Constitution that was eventually ratified by the convention and then by the states. He was the fourth president of the United States. So here's a problem that Madison wants to address in this essay. America was embarking on this experiment of having a popular government. That is a government that was rooted in the will of the people and not simply in a hierarchy from above. But the worry of governments and ideas, these kinds of governments have been talked about, even experimented with throughout human history. And here's one of the traditional worries that people had about popular governments. They produce factions. What's a faction? A faction is a group of citizens within the country that has a common motive to invade the rights of others or to act contrary to the long-term interests of the community as a whole. So when factions become a majority in a popular government, they can act on those motives. They've got a reason to violate the rights of others, or to do something that's bad for the community but maybe good for them. And now when they become a majority, then they can do it. So the whole point of this essay is to give Madison's reply to this objection. The objection is popular governments are no good because they produce destructive factions. Madison has a solution, the Federalist solution, which is this. If you have a republic, it's made out of a large enough number of citizens and they're spread over a wide enough territory that factions are going to cancel each other out and their influence can be nullified. Factions are going to be a bigger problem for popular governments if they have smaller territories with smaller numbers of people, and because then you're more likely to have a majority which is able to oppress the smaller groups. So Madison is really afraid of the states, which were much more empowered and autonomous under the preceding Articles of Confederation. But Madison sees the power of the states as a problem. That's where oppression is likely to occur. That's where injustice is likely to occur. But if you have a big representative government, like the federal government, the national government, well, then actions aren't going to be this big problem. So let's walk through his argument for why he thinks it's going to play out this way. Okay, so the worry is faction. The worry is you're going to have a small group that can oppress others or to pursue its own narrow interests. And Madison says you got two possible solutions here. You can either remove the causes of a faction so that they don't occur, or you can control the effects of factions so they can't carry out their evil designs. And so he wants to look at both of these possible solutions to see which is actually going to work. So let's look at the first solution is you could remove the causes of faction. So let's look at what the causes of faction are. Why do factions develop? Madison identifies two basic causes. The first is liberty. You give people the liberty to pursue whatever they see as in their own best interests, to develop the kind of businesses they want, and the kind of religious communities that they want, and the kind of other civic institutions that they want to live and write and think and associate and communicate as they see fit. That's one cause of faction. Why is it a cause of faction? Because people are different. In other words, there's going to be diversity of the opinions that they form about the world, of the passions that they have, things they care about. their interests, what they see as valuable and worth pursuing and investing in. And this is really important for Madison, there's going to be a diversity of property. They're going to pursue different kinds of business, different kind of economic venues, and that's going to give them vested interest in different sorts of business interests and so forth. I mean, you're going to have, in his time, it would have been the farmers, like the agriculturalists, really the plantation owners, like Madison, and those are largely, a lot of that's in the South. And then you got the manufacturing interest in the North, and the people who are involved in trade and international trade of different kinds. So those people have different interests. They care about different stuff. In other words, you give people the freedom to do what they want, and the fact that there's going to be diversity of opinion, and you're going to have special interest groups. You're going to have factions, right? Some people want high tariffs. Some people want low tariffs because tariffs might be good for some businesses and bad for other businesses, and so forth. Now, can you remove these causes of faction, according to Madison? Well, he says we shouldn't remove liberty. We want people to have liberty to associate and communicate and to pursue whatever they see as their own best interest, to build the kind of businesses and industry that they want to. We shouldn't remove that. And diversity just can't be removed. No matter what we do, people are going to be different. In other words, solution one is not going to work. We just can't remove the causes of faction. Faction is going to be with us. And that means that we're going to have to fall back on solution two, which is to control the effects of faction. How can we possibly control the effects of factions so that they don't lead to oppression and destructive stuff? Madison sees two possible ways. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented. So let me stop and explain that one. Factions only become destructive when they have an opportunity of controlling a popular government, and that only happens when they become a majority, right? As long as the faction is a minority of the population, they can't do much. But if they become the majority, then they can control the government and they can bring their policies into reality. So you could prevent a majority of people from ever having the same passion or interest, or you allow for that majority to occur, but the majority having such coexistent passion or interest must be rendered by their number and local situation unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. In other words, another way to control the effects of faction is if the majority is spread over such a wide area and there's such a large number that they can't pull off some kind of scheme or conspiracy to oppress the minority. These are going to be the routes that Madison pursues, that he thinks are available in a republic which is spread over a large country and a large body. All right, so let's explore this a little bit more. He says there's two kinds of popular government. All right, there's pure democracy and there's republics. In pure democracy, the citizens vote directly on all government decisions. So they had that in ancient city-states of Athens, and you have to have a very small number of citizens to pull this off, because they've all got to be able to gather and vote on everything that happens. It's like we were all a member of the House of Representatives. You can only do that when there's a very small number of citizens. Now, in a republic, the difference is that citizens elect representatives who then run the government and vote on all the actual policy decisions. And what a republic allows for is for there to be a large number of citizens spread over a large country. Because we don't all have to get together to make the laws. We just elect people who get together and make the laws and other policy decisions. So in America is a republic, and the Constitution is a republic, and so Madison is defending Republican form of popular government. Pure democracy, he says, can't do either one of the things that we have to do if we're going to control factions. It can't. It cannot. Yeah, it can't. What are the two things that it can't prevent the majority from having the same passion or interest. If you have a small group of people, a very small group of people, it's easy for one group with a certain agenda to become the majority. And when you have a very small group of people, you can't prevent that majority from carrying into effect themes of oppression. The smaller the group is, the easier it is for them to pull off some kind of scheme of oppression. So pure democracy is not going to work, but a republic can do both these things. Because in a republic, you've got a greater number of citizens spread over a greater sphere of the country. So with a republic, here's the potential advantage and potential risk of having elected representatives that are administrating the government. The potential advantage is that the representatives might be the best of the best. They might be the people who are least likely to sacrifice the public good and private rights. That's best case scenario. On the other hand, they might be the worst scoundrels who are able to manipulate the populace and exploit their prejudices and so forth. Both of these are possible if you've got elected representatives. However, here's what Madison wants to argue. If you have a big republic, then you've got a lot going for you. If you've got a big country, that means you've got a bigger pool of representatives to choose from. So you're more likely to get the cream of the crop. On the other hand, it's harder for scoundrel politicians to exploit, manipulate, and fool a bigger group of people. It's a lot easier to pull that off with a small group. But if you got 1 million people scrutinizing you, or hundreds of millions of people scrutinizing you, it's hard to trick them. So, he says, you're likely to get the better crop of representatives. It's also a lot less likely in a big country that a majority is going to have common motives, common interests. So it's going to be less likely that a faction becomes the majority. There's just too many competing ideas and pursuits and interests and passions in a big country. I mean, that was true in Madison's time, and perhaps much more so when you think about the 200 or 300 million Americans that there are. What does a majority agree on? It's hard to get Americans, a majority of those millions, to agree on anything. And also because if you have a bigger group of people, it's a lot harder to get away with, even for a majority, to get away with schemes of oppression. I mean, even if you have a majority, the minority is big enough to raise quite a stink and to put up quite a fight. So here's Madison's takeaway points. If you got a big country and you run it by a popular government, specifically a republic, factions aren't going to be your problem, because the country's so big that the factions will essentially cancel each other out and keep each other in check. And you'll be a lot less likely to have scoundrel politicians who dupe the people and fool them into, exploiting each other and trampling each other's rights. That's going to be harder to do because other parts of the country, other factions, other interest groups will keep check. Right. Now that essay is foundational for the concept of how American government works. Here's some questions I want you to think about, especially as we get ready for this discussion. First of all, let's review. What are the sources of faction that Madison refers to in his own time? I want you to go back and look at all these in detail. And that's the paragraph that starts latent causes of faction. What's he talking about there? What kind of harms does he think that those factions would do if they were given the opportunity? And try to get concrete here. I mean, he says that factions might invade the rights of other groups, minority groups, or they might do things that are in their own best interest, but not in the best interest of the whole community. But what does that specifically mean for each of the kinds of factions that he lists there. Think about it concretely. What might they do? Now I want you to bring that forward into our own times. What are the sources of faction in contemporary America? They might be largely the same as the ones that Madison listed. There might be different or new ones. But I want you to think about that. Don't just think superficially about, well, there's this group, that group, and so forth. But what are the sources of those factions? Is it their different business interests, property right interests? Is it their different belief systems? Is it their different, what is it? What is it? And then what kind of harms would such factions do if they were given the opportunity? What are ways in which these different groups might trample on the rights of other groups or go against the best interest of the whole if they were given the chance? And now, ask yourself this. Do you think Madison was right? Do you think that the size and the diversity of our country stops factions from successfully harming the country? If you think it doesn't successfully, tell me this. What harms do you think are being caused by factions? And then, let's think more broadly, okay? Not just about American politics. Think more broadly. It's true that any group will oppress others if it's given the opportunity. Is that true? Is that really how human nature works? Is it a good or a bad thing that people have such different ideas and competing interests? Wouldn't life be easier if we all agreed? What do you think? And then let's try to make this concrete and personal for your own leadership philosophy. Do any of Madison's ideas apply to leading smaller groups, businesses, families, teams, and so forth? Think about the group you lead or you hope to lead. What are the competing factions in it? How will you manage those factions? All right, ponder all that. Be ready to discuss.